Welcome to Santa Monica, California, and the library of comic book writer and artist Eddie deAngelini.
I started writing and drawing my comic strip about 6 years ago and realized pretty quickly it was something I wanted to dedicate my life to. I've always loved comics, always read the Sunday funnies in the newspaper when I was a kid, and I wanted to do something like that and have people laugh and feel joy when they read my comic strip the way I did when I was a kid reading my comic books and the Sunday newspaper funnies.
Eddie is the creator, writer, and artist of the weekly webcomic series Collectors.
The idea for my comic strip just kind of came out of my own life. I've always collected and loved comics, and being married, my wife kind of likens it to the battle between a marriage and a comic book collection and where the two collide. The idea just came from that and all the funny stuff that happens when you're married and you're also a bit of a comic book geek.
I feel my characters are valid. My characters are people. My characters have hope. Hope is a thing that takes us through. Jack Kirby.
Collectors is a slightly fictional account of my own life as a comic book collector and as a married man. And as my wife says, it is about a guy who loves his wife and his comic book collection, but not always in that order. It is something that draws on my own life and some of the funny things that happen. And I tell people that some of the comic strips are things that actually happened and some of them are made up. I will let you decide which is which. The first person who identified my creative talents, definitely my parents, especially my dad. I remember being a kid, being homesick from school, and he would stop off from work and buy some comic books to bring home for me to read, and that definitely started my love of comic books then and there. And when I started to draw the characters that I saw in the comics and kind of copy them, he would bring home pencils and tons of paper and stuff I'm sure that he took from work, but we will excuse him now for that. And I just started drawing, and I think that although my parents are very old world Italian immigrants where their thought is you go to school, you get a trade, you work hard, they didn't quite really understand me wanting to be an artist, because for them the idea of an artist is someone who's starving in the streets and isn't rich and famous until after they're dead. But I think hopefully I proved them wrong and showed them that you can do this and make somewhat of a living off of it. And later on realized that, my parents, especially my dad, is probably one of my biggest fans. And he really did set me down the road of wanting to do creative things and feeling like it's okay to do something creative. And when I started doing my comic strip, the biggest advocator of what I wanted to do and my abilities was definitely my wife, because I had talked about wanting to do something like this for so long, and she finally, I think, just got tired of hearing me talk about it and said, well, why aren't you doing it? And I think that started my thought process of, why am I not doing this? And so I just sat down and just started doing it.
I would rather entertain and hope people learn something than educate people and hope they were entertained. Walt Disney.
Eddie is a strong advocate of independent comic creating and has self-published several issues of his comic strip. The latest, True Collector's Romance, was published in July of 2018.
What people don't realize is the comic industry is a bit of a tricky business. There are a lot of writers and creators that work in comics creating stories and art for the biggest publishers, and a lot of them unfortunately have second jobs because it's tough to make a living in comics. There's just a very few that are breathing that rarefied air that are making a good living off of it. And by self-publishing, I can kind of bypass all of the troubles that come along with a major publisher. And I pretty much get to put every dollar in my pocket. It's a little tougher, but I think it's more rewarding in the long run. You self-publish, you have a whole list of challenges that someone who goes through a larger company, an established publisher, doesn't have. When you are doing your own book and putting it out there, you're not just the writer and the artist. You have to be the marketer, the accountant, the businessman, the editor. You're everything. So it's suddenly comes down to there are a whole field of things that you now have to learn how to do just to get your work out there and get it in front of people's eyes. And the challenge of that is now you have to learn all of these other things when you might have just said, oh, I just want to be an artist. I just want to be a writer. Well, if you're going to self-publish, guess what? You're going to have to learn how to do all these other things. But I can't stress enough that it is rewarding in the sense that you don't have anybody telling you what you can or can't do. You don't have someone telling you when your book is going to be released or if it's getting pushed back or what shows you can or can't do. You are pretty much the boss and you get to dictate what you do and how you do it.
I mean, bloody hell, what's menacing me? Apart from the fact that it's menacing me, you know, I mean, I have so many comics that it's menacing my lifestyle. You can hardly move. Dennis Gifford.
The old saying that behind every strong man is an even stronger woman is evident with Eddie and his wife, Kristen.
How did I meet Eddie? Well, our story is not that unique these days, but we actually met online on a dating website. He claims that he was just looking as a lark to make fun and laugh and have a joke. But when he saw my ad, that he paid real money just so that he could respond.
If there is no fear, there is no drama. Superman becomes boring. Invulnerability is dull. Dorothy Woolfolk.
Eddie currently manages and co-owns Heidi Ho Comics in Santa Monica, which is known for being the oldest comic shop in Southern California. He was also credited as a comic book historian and appeared on camera on Robert Kirkman's Secret History of Comics. He currently lives in Los Angeles with his wife, Kristen.
In my opinion, Eddie is so successful in his craft because he's just so determined and hardworking. He's at his work desk at home all the time sketching and lettering and coloring, and that's after he's been here all day running this shop. He sometimes is still there at his desk working after I've already gone to bed. And I also think his content is just so relatable. We're at conventions all the time where people come up to him and say, oh my gosh, your stuff is so funny. It's just like what happens with me and my partner. Do you have a secret camera in our home to see what's going on with us? Because we just had that conversation last week. And so I think that kind of just perfect combination of being relatable and just hardworking and determined makes him so successful in what he does.
Located on Broadway Street, just blocks from the famous Santa Monica Pier, Eddie's Heidi Ho comic book store is very popular with gamers of all ages, especially on Sundays when he hosts various gaming tournaments.
About 4.5 years ago, my partner approached me and said, Heidi Ho Comics is up for sale. Are you interested in buying it with me? And at that time, I was working for him at his store in Gardena, running his eBay store, social media, website. And I thought, if I'm working this hard for somebody else, why not do it for myself? So at the time, he told me what the buy-in was for my percentage, and I thought, well, I don't have that kind of money. So I had, at that time, a full run of Amazing Spider-Man from his first appearance in Amazing Fantasy 15 and Amazing Spider-Man #1 straight through to 700. And I auctioned off that entire collection to get the money to buy this shop. And at that time, my wife was not working. She had just come off 10 years working in the profession of her choice and decided she wanted to do something a little different, something a little less stressful, like owning your own business. So she'd said, I will come and work over there with you. And we run the shop together. And I got to say, that is the best thing that's ever happened since, from owning the shop, because there's no way I would have been able to do this by myself. There's no way I would have been able to do it without her here with me, running the place, making the decisions together, and just figuring out really what to do, because we went into this not really knowing what to do, and we had to kind of figure it all out.
But in my youth, the sight of the good paper sheet, the capable empty sheet with its hospitality, a white receptacle for the multitudinous possible guest, My heart leaped up as at a rainbow. Rose O'Neill.
Owning a shop has definitely been a help. It's also been a hindrance. It's kind of a double-edged sword. It's definitely a big help because you have more eyes on your work. It's easier to get your work out there, and it's easier to meet more people in the industry and get friendly with them and network. It's a hindrance in the sense that running a shop it's tough. It's a full-time gig. It's not something that you can just kind of set in motion and it kind of runs itself. You've got to be there. You got to be there to really make decisions, help things out, really just roll up your sleeves and put in the work. And that takes away time from when you could be creating your comic strip. And you got to really try to find a balance. And sometimes the shop takes a lot of your time, and sometimes you got to try to make time to make your comic strip a priority. So it's tough. It's tough to find a balance, and it's not always there, but you do your best.
This kind of work has been underrated for many years. Throwaway artwork is to be looked at and immediately discarded. This is a viewpoint I strongly disagree with. Frank Bellamy.
A funny story about Kristen when I first started doing the comic strip and her reaction to her character is the first couple ones that I did was me doing something stupid and her character being mad at me, and I drew her with like the mean eyes yelling at me, and her reaction was she got upset because she said, well, what happens if your comic strip takes off and it gets popular and everyone thinks I'm a horrible, mean person? But just the opposite happened, because some of those strips, like every once in a while when I do one where I'm doing something dumb and she's getting mad at me, I will post it on my Facebook page or Instagram or whatever, and people will have the reaction like, oh my God, I love Mean Kristen. She's my favorite character. And they love her. And I think Kristen hopefully is just warmed up to how I portray her, even though the character is based on us, how I portray her in my comic strip. Kristen has definitely been probably one of my biggest, if not the biggest, inspiration. After all, the whole comic strip is based on us, and it's all about our lives, sort of, and all the funny, goofy things that happen, or that we say, or that we hear other people say, or that we experience. And how she's actually inspired me in other ways is, like I said before, I've always wanted to do something creative for the longest time. And I think she just reached a point where she got tired of me talking about it and said to me, well, why aren't you doing it? And that was kind of like the whole kick in the butt that got me started in this in the first place.
An employee of Heidi Ho Comics, Jennifer Lopez.
What I like most about Eddie's comics is that they're very true to nature, to his and his wife's relationship, and I find that super charming and a lot of fun. I also really like his artwork for it because it's very newspaper style strip, and I grew up with Calvin and Hobbes and stuff like that, so it was very charming to me, his art style. Eddie asked me to translate his comic for him because I'm a native Spanish speaker, so it was very easy for me to translate it into Spanish. I just took phrases that I already knew in Spanish and kind of used them to convey the joke that he was trying to tell. I also asked my mom, I ran them by my mom, since she is a Spanish speaking only, and so I would hold up a strip to her or a translation, and I would ask her, does this make sense? And she would say yes, or she would say, no, it doesn't, I don't know what you're trying to tell me. And she just helped me smooth out the translations more.
When I'm not working on my comic strip, I'm usually here running the shop. And when I'm not here running the shop is when I'm usually writing and drawing my comic strip. It's a tough balance trying to do what literally is 2 full-time jobs at the same time and have personal time for the person that you love. But I try to dedicate at least 1 day a week for she and I just to do fun stuff and try to just get away from work. It's tough, but we do the best we can.
To me, writing is fun. It don't matter what you're writing, as long as you can tell a story. Stan Lee.
Eddie's good friend and fellow comic book writer, David Schrader.
As a comic book writer myself, Eddie's style differs in the sense that it's a lot more wholesome, I would say. Like it reminds me of strips that I read as a kid, like Charlie Brown, Peanuts, and Calvin and Hobbes later. And there's this real sense of nostalgia that you feel when you're reading it, and I connect to it because now I am a collector later in life, and my wife isn't always so supportive of the collecting part.
If I were given the opportunity to present a gift to the next generation, it would be the ability for each individual to learn to laugh at itself. Charles M. Schultz.
My advice for people trying to break into the comic field is just know what you're getting into. Because a lot of people go to comic conventions and they see people everywhere dressed up, fans everywhere. The conventions are just full of people, and they think, wow, this is easy money, quick, easy money to be made in comics, and nothing is further than the truth. If you want to make it as a creator in the comics industry, you got to be prepared for lots and lots of long hours, hard work, and it may take a good 4 or 5 years before you even get the ball rolling to start to become successful. And you just got to stick in there for the long haul. It takes complete, just total persistence to just keep going, even when you feel like nobody is even reading or looking at your work, when you feel like you're just not getting any traction whatsoever. You just got to keep going, because eventually things do happen.
I look so tired. Oh my god! I'm seriously not ready to start looking like my mother. Look at my laugh lines! How did they get so deep?
Yeah. I don't get it. What are you laughing at so much?